What we're going to look at is just review the concept of action planning, examine the process of action planning, and it says here that we're going to offer an example of how an action plan may look. We've already kind of done that in the manual. So if you refer to the manual, there is an action plan already completed that you might find helpful. And as I said, some people like action planning, some people hate action planning, some people use it all the time, some people will never use it. But until you've tried it, you can't make a judgment on that. So this session is just about you having a go and seeing whether you think it will be useful. Personally, I use action plans a lot. If I was doing something like the portfolio, I would be using action plans. If I'm writing an essay or something, I use action plans. If I want to change a bit of my practice, then I use an action plan. So I am an action planning type of person. But somebody called me a OCD person back there, so perhaps it's my obsessive compulsive kind of systematic way of looking at things. But you might find them useful, and I hope you do, but you can have a go.
Worked examples on page 64 and 65 of the manual.
64 and 65. I think that's actually also on your sheet of the evidence that we've, the sheet I gave you to help with the last exercise. So what's action planning? It's exactly what it says it is. It's a plan outlining the actions to be taken in order to achieve some sort of target. This bit here, now I've put this in, but I know this is going to cause all sorts of issues and debate, so I might just skim over it really quickly and say nobody can ask any questions. But an action plan needs to be specific. So it needs to be specific and it needs to be clear what it is you're trying to do, what your overall goal is, and what is it you're actually trying to achieve. So it needs to be specific. If it's vague, it'll mean nothing to anybody, and it certainly won't guide you to plan what you're going to do. So be specific. It needs to be measurable, and by measurable it just means that you need to know at the end of it whether you've achieved it. And you can only do that if it's measurable. So for example, you could have an action plan that says, my overall goal is to ensure that the patients in my practice will be given or will give informed consent for their treatment. And that might be your overall game. So how do you know then that you've achieved it? And that is quite a measurable one, because you might have things like, I will produce information leaflets. Your measurement is that you've produced them. You might measure it by saying, okay, my patients tell me that they gave informed consent and they knew exactly what I was going to do to them. And that might be measured by a patient questionnaire. So it needs to be measurable. Needs to be attainable. I don't know about you, but I'm a great one for writing action plans that I haven't a snowball's chance of ever completing, because I just set my goals too high. I set my sights too high. So it needs to be something that within the course of the revalidation pilot, it's realistic for you to attain and for you to achieve. So you're not going to change the whole of the GOsC structure and membership during the course of this pilot. So there's no point having an action plan relating to that. But you might be able to make changes in your practice, etc., that you can do. So it needs to be attainable, needs to be realistic, and that's basically the same thing. I always think when I see this the way of remembering things. It needs to be realistic, so it needs to be within your scope of practice, and it needs to be realistic, and it needs to feed back into the revalidation pilot for these purposes. So a realistic action plan and a timely action plan. You've got a year to complete, just over a year, no, a year. You can tell when you get to my age, all the years merge into one. So you don't have that long, and every 3 months you're going to be asked to produce a piece of evidence and give feedback on the process. So you need to start thinking about, okay, realistic timescales. What can I achieve within 3 months? If, for example, Carol's clinical audit information and guidelines, you felt, well, I'd really like to do a clinical audit, that's going to take you longer than perhaps 3 months. So perhaps in your action plan, you look at producing something relating to audit at a later date in the process, rather than your first piece of evidence. So it's about planning and making sure that you know what you're going to achieve. If I was you and I was doing this, I would have probably 3 action plans, one for each. No, it's 4, isn't it? 4 action plans, one for each sort of body of evidence I'm going to produce, with the 4 different deadlines on them. But that's just a suggestion. The process, can you see all that? Because that's quite, it's quite bright. You okay at the back? Is that quite clear for you? Yeah, it's fine. and have a look at sheets. So the process, first thing you do, and oh, I'm turning into my mother, paper hankies up my sleeve. First of all, you set yourself an overall goal or an aim, and that should clearly indicate what you're trying to achieve. Somebody want to give me, just off the top of their head, something they might like to do in their practice?
A practice manual that gives standard operating procedures.
Okay, right. So your overall goal would be to produce this manual, this Bible, that outlines your procedures within your clinical practice. It doesn't really matter, just to say
this is what I do in this circumstance.
Yeah, and we were talking
because
because
it's going to be huge. Yeah. It has to be huge. But the only way I can say this is what
she can share it with everybody when she's done it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, but that's your overall goal, and that's a really excellent one for us to break down. So your overall goal or aim would be to produce this operational standards or whatever it is manual. Right. What you then need to do is break down. That's quite a big goal, quite a broad one. Break it down into smaller, more specific objectives, and what individual steps do you need to take in order to achieve an overall goal. So if we worked on that one, what sorts of things could you do? With lots of talk, for instance, about not reinventing the wheel.
You could break it into categories for patient handling and record keeping or something.
Right, so one of your specific objectives might be to review the potential structure of the manual once it's produced. So that could be an objective. That's quite a small specific one, okay, that's good. Any other ones?
Borrow one off someone else.
Exactly. So you might review, another specific objective might be to access anything that's already out there. So, and review it to see whether it would be of use to you. So that would be a specific objective, yeah. That would be my first step.
Nick it, yeah.
Ask permission.
Of course.
But it might be that you might get, we're going to show you the Moodle site later on. You might put up in the Moodle site, I'm really interested in doing this. And somebody might come back and say, well, we've already got, would you like to look at it? Would you like to review it? So that would be a specific objective, would be to find out what other people have, access it and review it. And another specific objective could maybe be then, okay, that's what they've got. Let's look at the structure of that and compare it with what we need.
It's not going to be what I do, is it? It's not going to be what I do. It's got to be specific to me.
You know, a health and safety one might be quite similar. So you can, maybe something you can do.
So make sure you haven't missed something.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so into smaller, more specific objects that you need to take. Right? And then what you do is you detail the exact actions that you're going to do in order to achieve each of those objectives. So for your one, your first objective, because you'd have prioritised by them, would be about reviewing what's already out there. How are you going to do that? And I've already probably given you some things you do, but how are you going to review, access and review things that are already out there that other osteopaths are using?
Moodle.
Yeah, I put it up in Moodle, but that would be one of your actions, to put a posting on Moodle for other people to see and wait for feedback from other osteopaths. Anything else you could do?
Reinvent the wheel?
You could, if you really wanted to, write your own. Personally, I don't think you would need to, but you know, it might be that once you've reviewed and accessed that you do feel you need to rewrite.
Just search the internet, see if there's anything
Yeah,
out there.
Google. Google's a great thing. You know, just Google, see what's out there. So just think of specific ways and actions that you might undertake in order to achieve it, and just detail them down. And that, to me, that's almost the really... if you don't have a good goal and good objectives, your actions aren't going to be clear, if you like, and you might go off doing things that aren't really pertinent and waste time. But if you've got a clear goal and clear objectives, then your actions should sort of flow from that. And then set yourself realistic timescales for completion of each stage of your action plan. So if that's where you're going to do, okay, I'm going to put this posting up in Moodle, that's dead quick. I could do that by the end of the week. But actually, waiting for feedback might take, you know osteopaths are like 4 weeks. Then I've got to review what I've got. That might take another, 3 or 4 weeks. So think of specific, timetables that you work toward. You probably won't stick to them, but you've got them there, and it's good to refer back to them. So be flexible with them, but it's good to have a deadline to aim for. It's like having an essay deadline, isn't it? You know that sometimes you make it. Now this is more for the purpose of the pilot, although you should be doing it as well, but you need to, once you've completed the actions and you've achieved your goal, or you've hopefully achieved your goal, you need to reflect on, okay, I've done that, what impacts that had on my practice? How is having this manual, if you like, help me in my everyday?
It's not for me. It's
No, I know.
what I do.
Yeah, I'm looking at you, but I mean,
No, I mean,
Uh-huh.
it's to display what I do.
for the
when.
patients.
No.
No, just for everybody.
For revalidation.
Oh, just for revalidation.
Well,
Oh, okay. I was assuming you would
is that
use
what
it
this
in
is for?
general.
Well,
I think there
Yeah.
is issues along the way that you pick up here,
Of
so
course.
that would
Test it on your patients. Yeah, read that. Do you like it?
But
Do you think that'll
this
pass as
it's about
revalidation?
producing evidence of what
Yes,
you do.
but sorry,
I'm writing
I'm
down what
yeah.
I do, and this is what I do in the circumstances.
I was probably taking it about 3 steps further down the line and thinking, you've produced this, you might as well use it. Okay? So apologies for that.
You could audit whether that is what
Yeah.
you do in practice.
So reflect on the impact it has on your osteopathic practice, and as Fiona says, that could be through a process of audit, whatever. And then detail any evidence that supports your analysis of how your osteopathic practice has changed. So that will come in, say, a self-reflection or something like that. Okay? So does that process make sense?
So it also, as well as proving what you do, it meets the criteria. It also needs to show that you are getting benefit from the process of doing the revalidation. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
you've sort of tied it, yeah. Yes, is the answer to that. Yes.
Okay, so you can't just provide evidence. You actually need to show that this is being of benefit to you as well.
But remember that the action plans are
If you're
optional.
perfect on your health and safety risk assessment, you don't have to show any further benefit from it. If you are spotlessly clean on one aspect of something, you don't have to then go, oh, I've got to get better. Are you?
No.
Because there will be other areas where you would be able to. So, don't get too hung up on the benefit bit. Change maybe, but if you're brilliant at something, do something else.
If you were brilliant at something, you probably wouldn't be doing the action plan. You'll find the action plan's probably bits that you need to work on and need to develop.
It should be left out of your action plan.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't the benefit just the icing on the cake that may be there, but actually we've got to make this cake. And if there's a benefit, I mean, that's one of the things about the pilot, is to see what the costs and the benefits are, if any.
That's right.
It's not assumed that there are benefits. The pilot is actually to look and see if there are benefits.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you decide that you want to do your menu, I imagine, if Fiona's just going to explain all this to us, that you can do your menu, and at the end of it you'd say, well, I did all this, and I hope it's satisfactory, but actually I don't think I've gained anything at all. And I think it's very important that we all realise that that is one of the things that this pilot is about, because the government wants to know if the benefits are proportionate to the costs in time and money to all of us. And part of the benefits is the benefits to us in learning. But the overall thing is about the benefits to patients in terms of delivering a better quality of care. So if there's a benefit to us in feeling more informed, in improving our health and safety, then implicitly there will be an improved quality of care for our patients. But if we go about this exercise and we find that there is no benefit, then that is exactly what this wonderful team of people want to know, and that's what KPMG will be looking at, because if there is no benefit, then there will be some critical looking at this scheme and some alterations made to it to see how is it possible to deliver a better quality of care by making changes to it. I think I've understood, but Fiona will tell me if I have.
I absolutely agree, Caroline, with your point that if there's no benefit, then we do need to know. I was going to reflect on doing the standard operating procedure, because the interesting thing, and we find this with our own procedures, is that the challenge is not knowing that there is a process written. The challenge is knowing about whether or not that process is implemented and whether one actually does it. I was just going to hand to Carol here, actually, just to talk that there's a very interesting audit in your handbook, I think, that deals with asking a question like, I mean, it could be a question that derives, I think, from from your standard process. For example, do I always note down consent for HVTs? I don't know. That's an extreme example. And actually, there's the audit handbook provides lots of different examples to help you to be able to say, yes, in fact, I do implement these standard processes that are on my shelf. They're not just there getting dusty. I don't know, Carol, if that might be a useful point for you to talk a little bit about your audit handbook, if you felt confident to do so. Sorry, I've put you on the spot a bit. Feel free.
No, it's fine. I think that the purpose of the audit handbook generally is we try to find tools which is taken from the literature rather than just develop our own pilot, which would take a long time. But the one thing I would stress is that they are there as a sort of helpful thing and not a stick to beat ourselves with.
Yeah.
There's one in particular which is what we call a general practice audit, which is being put together from various different organisations about ideal situations. So it has some benefit from sort of legislation, from regulation, from a variety of different groups. So it's just things to go through and consider really about how you can get things right in practice. And there are a lot of things which should be considered in some practices based on what your actual practice is like and where it's housed. It may not be possible to use those sort of things, but in other things and other areas, it's just things to think about that could be implemented, which just raises perhaps the quality and standard of practice both for yourself and your patients and for any personnel. So the whole thing with the audit handbook is that there's a lot of resources in there which are designed ultimately to try and make life more straightforward for you and to use time more efficiently. It's on the ozone, so there's a Word copy up there at the moment, and the GOsC has had a team of designers making it.
It's all,
friendly.
the link, sorry Carl, the link's also on the Moodle site that we'll be talking about this afternoon.
And one thing I would say, that if you're using the audit handbook and you're not sure about where to start, just email me. I have done a worked example which I did of a case note audit looking at my case notes, and it's there and it's full horror or glory, however you wish to think about it. But audit is relatively straightforward to do. It's just thinking about it and then getting going. But it is quite a nice way of doing something that is important to you, that you decide upon, and you can make it as big or small as you want as well. As I say, if you have a go, and then if there's any problems, just give me a shout.
Thank you, Carol. I think it's probably around about lunchtime. Yeah. What we'll do in the afternoon when you come back is we'll have a wee go at action planning, and then we'll move into looking at how you present your evidence. So a couple more sort of interactive exercises for you in the afternoon.
What do we do for food?
Oh yes, lunch. Josie, what's the arrangements for lunch?
Lunch, if you make your way back into the lobby, lunch is on the second floor of the restaurant. It's a buffet lunch, so...
Buffet away.
So follow Jodie.